Sometimes a piece of art makes you feel an emotion so strong that you have to make more art to get it out of your system. For Euphoria, that emotion was confusion. For Togainu no Chi, it's. Togainu no Chi is a 2005 visual novel that makes me feel like Deadly Premonition seems to make its fans feel, except Deadly Premonition seems to actually hold up to technical scrutiny. Togainu no Chi is the debut work of BL developer Nitro Chiral, kickstarting an aesthetic tradition of completely changing the aesthetic for every subsequent title. Togainu no Chi is the worst title of their entire catalog. Togainu no Chi is an experience that I thoroughly enjoyed. Togainu no Chi has this interesting addendum to the standard "this is fiction, please don't do this IRL" disclaimer. Huh, that's weird. Why would they feel the need to put that? As you might be able to tell, Togainu no Chi deals with a lot of sensitive subject matter and doesn't handle any of it particularly deftly. More often, it fails spectacularly. While it should be simple enough to disavow these failings and praise only the defensible parts of the experience, I found myself unable to do so. Rather than it being a point of contention, the game's heavy-handed and flawed depictions of sexual violence, abuse, and fascism were themselves a source of joy. I want to establish that I don't find the subject matter itself funny, it's rather the excess Togainu no Chi uses in depicting these. I don't find it funny that a man is being sexually assaulted. I find it funny that the choices that lead you to two separate abrupt bad ends involving sexual assault are go left and go right, making the zone effectively a rape hallway cul-de-sac. I don't find CSA funny. I find it funny that most of the love interests are only gay with respect to the player character, while the one flamboyant guy in the setting is a gay pedophile who rapes and mutilates children, which the game feels the need to remind you of nearly every time he appears. I don't find violence against women funny. I find it funny that the only female character gets killed in the exact same way with almost the exact same dialogue in 4 out of 5 routes. I don't find fascism funny. I find it funny that one of the two fascist endings has your guy become a waifish whore whose only joy in life is cucking his fascioid husband. A mix of spectacular excess and failures that induces a particular kind of frenzy whenever you reflect on the experience and remember in mute amazement that, yeah, that really happened. Very few media makes me feel as strongly as this game does. Nothing about the game works. Critiquing this game has been more of a challenge relative to that time I made a video on Euphoria from a structural standpoint. In Euphoria's case, its themes were fairly easy to identify and thus evaluate whether or not the work reflected them. Togainu no Chi has the problem of not having any clear theme, so its faults are difficult to discuss around a single through line. Based on developer comments, the game seems to have been conceived of as a dark passion play rather than an intentional exploration of one idea where different routes take different angles of consideration. The drama of the individual routes might have been of bigger interest to its developers than any thematic core, or even the setting itself. It would explain why each route has different concerns, shallow inclusion of the true end love interest in each route notwithstanding. Owing to its lack of focus, the game's quality would seem to suffer from death by 1,000 cuts rather than from a single fatal storytelling weakness. However, following through this analogy, it's more like death by a couple gaping stab wounds. Any given puncture might have been fatal, but in its particular brand of excess, the game inflicts them all throughout the body, leaving no area unblemished. So following Togainu no Chi's example, let's ready our screwdrivers and gouge the corpse to find just how deep these wounds are. Togainu no Chi takes place in a war-torn Japan following World War III, which occurred, as many events do, in 20XX. Japan had remilitarized, forming a totalitarian national ideology single-mindedly geared towards growing loyal, unquestioning soldiers. This ideology was no match against the reality of war, and the entire country was left devastated. So much so that the survivors split the country into East and West to divide the recovery efforts. The newly formed governments made great efforts to abandon their militaristic ideology for one valuing peace. In one of the more drastic measures, the now devastated Tokyo was abandoned as the nation's capital, a gesture meant to reinforce the transformation of Japan. However, these rapid changes were highly dissonant to the youth the government had groomed into child soldiers, now expected to discard their upbringing to assimilate as peaceful, law-abiding citizens. The government sought to retrain these children by arbitrarily reassigning them to family units. These measures predictably failed, leaving an entire generation of children as disaffected orphaned youths with little in the way of communal ties or appreciation of consequence. Many of these drifting youths were drawn to the lawless territory of Tokyo, now Toshima, to make their living fighting and dying without governmental interference. Yet those who remained under Japanese authority were no less susceptible to violence, as the state held no restraint in using its power to rein in its problem children. Life imprisonment, unfair trials, and state-sanctioned torture were common tools for the new, peaceful Japan. With assimilation out of reach and state repression always in the background, much of the post-war generation lived on the edge of legality, sanctioned street fighting becoming the dominant cultural touchstone of the generation. Our protagonist Akira is one such street fighter. This is a strong setup that perfectly explains our protagonist's disposition, who is as disaffected, antisocial, and cavalier as you might expect for someone with the above background. Further, the world-building works for setting up effective social commentary without relitigating specific historical events. As you might have noticed, much of the consequences for World War III look a lot like World War II. Once again, a totalitarian militarized Japan is left devastated by war, and once again a nation is divided into East and West in the post-war aftermath. While these specific historical parallels might start ringing alarm bells, nothing about this Japan's military engagements are ever made clear. I think this is an effective choice for a story that seemingly wants to focus on the malaise of post-war youth. Not elaborating on the conflict allows the story to train its focus on the next generation without minimizing wartime atrocities. And while the near disappointment Akira has for not getting to fight in World War III seems questionable, neither he nor anyone else is really nostalgic for the old Japan, nor does he express any nationalist sentiment. If anything, the story expresses a deep distrust in state power writ large. The nation abused a generation of children into perfect soldiers and abuses them just the same during peacetime. Perhaps it is the nature of the state to abuse its citizens into conformity, regardless of which ideals it espouses. And while the game never invokes any real-world historical events, there is something cogent about focusing on youth that were harmed by state power during wartime in the more progressive Reconstruction, similar to how leftist youth movements in Japan were suppressed by the fascist government and the democratic one. This applicability never amounts to anything in the narrative, nor does it need to, but these parallels help lend plausibility to the story, in particular to its depiction of youth culture. Moving from the game's history to its present-day conflict, Akira is arrested and faces life in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Two mysterious government officials, Emma and Gwen, offer him a way out. The abandoned capital Toshima has become the center of drug production through an organization named Viskio, which threatens to destabilize the rebuilding nation through their product's potency. At the center of this production lies a man called Il-Rei, who has managed to subdue the formerly lawless land through his own power and charisma. Despite his lucrative position, he offers people a chance to claim the throne for themselves. This chance is Igra, a citywide tournament where participants fight each other for a winning poker hand of tags in order to challenge Il-Rei for his position. Unlike Akira's street fights, Igra is practically lawless. Firearms are prohibited, but killing your opponent is permissible, encouraged even. The stakes are life or death either way, as all participants who lose their tags in battle are summarily disposed of. Akira is given a get-out-of-jail card for the price of entering the tournament himself to take down Il-Rei and destroy the drug operation. He agrees with relatively little resistance. After all, he's too antisocial to want to run the drug operation himself. Further, a part of him has always been curious about what a fight to the death entails. Alright, we've got our world and conflict established and both look promising. The world's history is painted in broad strokes, but convincingly renders a society with compromised morals that in turn produces compromised people. Akira is ostensibly doing a good deed here, albeit for purely self-interested reasons, but Il-Rei isn't significantly worse than the present figures that run Akira's society. He could only begin to operate because both governments chose to abandon the city, and both governments are perfectly content imprisoning and torturing civilians regardless. The rot is too deep for any one act of violence to fix the country, or perhaps even make a dent. It sets up the narrative well for a story with more personal stakes. Our protagonist lacks the power and motivation to effect large-scale change in the world, so it makes sense to try and find someone to weather the storm with instead. To try and survive, even grow to thrive, amidst a world of blood and decay. The opening and box art seem to be pointing in that direction at least. Our love interests and our protagonists demonstrate capacity for and enjoyment of violence, and this game's focus on romance indicates that this is part of the appeal. Most of our heroes are characterized by the struggle between succumbing to or rising above the inhumanity their world demands, a struggle that persists because their world refuses to improve. So how does this work out at the end? Ah, well, that's unfortunate. I guess one protracted act of violence was enough to fix the country after all, because most of the endings see you living with your love interest while Japan has been restored back to pre-war levels, and all the excesses of totalitarian power and control disappeared off-screen. For all the time spent embroiled in a conflict born from long-term neglect and generational trauma, the game is remarkably happy to just contrive its own setting away to give the main pair their happy, or idealistically bittersweet, ending. It's disappointing because much of the game's appeal was founded on its violent dystopia and the maladjusted people that arise from it. Yet now the world itself has folded to mirror the love interests completing their character arc. It deals critical damage to the integrity of the game's society writ large. However, the failures of the larger setting isn't a fatal problem in itself. The broader world is only confronted at the beginning and end of the character routes, so it's generally inconsequential to the moment-to-moment action of the story. The setting primarily serves to set up Igra, where the love interests are, and where the location where most of the story will take place. So how is Igra itself? Does it behave as a living, breathing world extant to the characters? Does it provide a suitable stage for the drama of each love story? Not really. Akira is our mode of perceiving the game's world, so it's more crucial that his interactions with the setting are believable and interesting, and in turn that the setting gives Akira opportunities to express himself as a character. As with the larger setting, this relationship starts off promising. Akira has no strong attachment to a community or to his own life, and has built his life accordingly. He operates as a solo, sponsorless street fighter and has no need to deal with people except through controlled adversarial interactions. The only people he deals with on a non-hostile basis are two sort of fans of his and his childhood friend, KEISUKE. Akira's life satisfies his basic needs, yet leaves him unfulfilled at a deeper level as these fights become routine, boring, lacking entirely in the stimulation he imagines World War III, and now Igra, would provide him with. Violence has become so routine that he no longer fears the consequences of such interactions, viewing death itself in abstract, neutral terms. It makes sense why he would be handpicked for a mission like this. Yet despite his undefeated status, there's a lot of room to challenge Akira as a character. He claims no fear of death, yet his life has never been in danger. He presents himself as a loner, yet spares no thought to the people in his social circle who value and care for his well-being. He's experienced and practical, yet deeply stupid. Before you properly interact with any of the love interests, Igra itself destroys Akira's preconceptions, and demonstrates both to him and the player what's actually at stake. One of the first things Akira sees once he enters tournament grounds is a man fucking the corpse of his opponent. Akira panics. Suddenly death is not the end. Suddenly the nature of cruelty, pure pointless cruelty, is made manifest. Suddenly death appears not as a clinical cessation of one's bodily functions, but as the end of one's ability to resist, the ability to uphold one's basic human dignity. In a moment, the stakes of this competition are made clear for Akira, and for the first time in a very, very long time, he feels fear. The spectacle is still fresh in his mind. Akira holds up in an abandoned building for the night and considers his next move. It's clear that his prior experience in street fights won't help him adapt to or understand Igra, and he has more to guard than just his life. While now wary of the consequences of losing, he remains curious about the struggle itself. Perhaps a true fight to the death will revive his spirit. Suddenly he hears noises outside. Someone seems to have spotted him from the window. They enter. They draw closer and...
Shadow, we're here to help you, man. With what? I don't know, but I value our friendship.
It's KEISUKE and he's here to ruin the dramatic tension. He followed us all the way to Tokyo because he was so concerned about our well-being, never mind the fact that he has no means of protecting us. But we can't leave until we've killed Il-Rei, and KEISUKE can't leave because he's now dependent on us for protection, so we're stuck with him. Progressing through Igra is delayed while we have to get him up to speed on the tournament, find him a weapon, and try to get more information on the situation. On our way to accomplish this, we run into love interest Rin, who offers to show us around because he thinks we're hot, and we go with him to Admin HQ to meet Igra's facilitator Arbitro. The game lays it on very thick about his perversions and will continue to do so every time he appears. KEISUKE receives a breakdown on Igra but decides not to join. He's opposed to killing, both for himself and for Akira, and continues to maintain this stance despite being in a setting where it's a fact of life. Rin offers to take us to another one of his contacts and we oblige, on the way meeting Igra's enforcers who punish rule breakers and dispose of losers. We're also introduced to one of Arbitro's creations, a young boy abused into behaving like a dog and with his vocal cords surgically removed. The enforcers beat a man to death in the street over a false charge and leave, though not before almost blowing Akira's cover. We then meet Ren's contact, the informant and third love interest Motomi, in a bar that's now a de facto neutral zone. All three establish their personalities fairly quickly. Keisuke is the earnest childhood friend, Rin is a mischievous femboy, and Motomi is a laid-back old son. As Rin and Motomi are still basically strangers, Keisuke and Akira remain wary of them, but decide to make contact to learn as much as they can. At the very least, both say they have nothing to gain by fighting the two. Motomi isn't a competitor in IGRA, and Rin is apparently so proficient in fighting that IGRA has become boring for him. The common route of visual novels generally serves two purposes: to provide intrigue for each of the love interests, giving the player a reason to pursue them, and to reveal plot details for the routes to then uncover. Togainu no Chi's common route accomplishes this well enough. As far as the love interests go, we get more one-on-one interactions with each before the routes branch. We discover Rin wasn't lying about being good at fighting and will immediately switch to a cold demeanor in response to a certain unknown subject. Motomi is mysterious and knows things, but is still chill, and there's the super strong guy who fights wearing skin-tight leather pants named Shiki. There's also this brown-haired man who speaks in riddles and seems above the whole conflict, but the player isn't able to approach him without completing all other routes. As for plot, several more events happen as part of the common route, including the rape hallway cul-de-sac, but they generally serve to establish two main points. First, the drug produced in Toshima, Ryan, sees active use during the tournament, and gives its users enhanced physical capabilities and a sharp change in personality. For our purposes, and with how it plays out in practice, these are the drugs that make you evil. Second, Akira's blood has a strange effect on people. Two of his opponents immediately go into violent convulsions after consuming Akira's blood. After the second time this happens, Akira is no longer able to write it off as coincidence. Something about him is different from other people. Part of him is unknown to himself. Further, participating in killing is deeply unsettling to him in practice. After a man becomes incapacitated from his blood, Akira takes his tags and leaves him for dead. He feels restless and confused and finds himself unable to explain his reactions, which only distresses him further. He returns to Keisuke and Rin with Motomi, and they all congratulate him on his victory. This causes Akira to snap at Keisuke for being a giant kiss-ass, now praising him when before he consistently opposed either him or Akira killing anyone. Keisuke is distraught and runs away. Akira regrets his outburst but doesn't go after him. During the night, one of Akira's former opponents, Takeru, is coaxed into taking Ryan by a mysterious brown-haired man, seemingly able to see into people's souls, and produce the drug on a whim. He swears revenge on Akira, resenting him for being unburdened and fighting for nothing and no one but himself. The routes begin to branch as Akira starts looking for Keisuke. I struggled to communicate this point without just showing all of the common route, but I hope this rapid-fire summary helps demonstrate that IGRA doesn't have a substantial role in the story, and further that the love interests distract the player from it. Right after the cold reality of IGRA is made clear to Akira and the player, Keisuke shows up to disarm the tension and prevent us from engaging in the tournament, because we have to get the useless anime best friend up to speed. This then leads us to Rin, who seems both entirely above and unaffected by IGRA, and starts palling around with us to take us to HR. For one instance of understated, chilling, faceless cruelty, we are immediately led into 3 scenes bereft of this tension, and introduced to several locations all in a row where violence is de jure or de facto forbidden. There are still reminders that IGRA is home to all kinds of human rights violations through Arbitro, Cal, and the Executioners, but this primarily transforms the threat of IGRA in the abstract to the threat of 3 specific guys in IGRA. It tells us that we don't have to worry about the interaction we saw when we first got here. We don't have to worry about impersonal cruelty coming from any person. We just have to worry about personal harms done for personal reasons at the hands of 3 or so people. The other competitors disappear into the background in favor of the major players. While this has the benefit of efficiency, it deals significant damage to the idea of IGRA as a setting that exists independently of the player. Actually participating in the tournament to complete Akira's mission is almost entirely forgotten about because of Keisuke. The only times we are accosted stand out as plot events because they show Akira as special. The first major event because someone holds a personal grudge against Akira, and the second shows how Akira is biologically special through his blood. All this serves to make clear that IGRA revolves around Akira. Any challenges he faces are personally relevant, and all major events shall be personally witnessed, and the game isn't skilled enough to obfuscate this. Perhaps this is to be expected for a visual novel. By nature of the medium, the action of the story has to revolve around characters with faces, sprites, and voice acting. A larger world can be difficult to simulate because we are limited in the number of people that we can see. Other visual novels can get around this by including side stories, interludes outside the protagonist's perspective, or just being large enough in scope that the world is actually populated. But to make analogy to another medium constrained to a small number of characters and character interactions, a theater set necessarily only shows a small slice of the world, but should convincingly allude to its own continuation beyond the stage. Togainu no Chi shows that there is nothing else to see. But this isn't necessarily a critical failure. The primary appeal of romance-focused visual novels are the love stories with the love interests. If those are engaging, then the work has ultimately fulfilled its goals, no matter what else suffers for it. So how are those character routes? Bad. I'm going to go in order based on how most players are likely to experience these routes, with one notable exception. I'd argue the game directs you to Keisuke on a first playthrough since he has the most history with Akira, and his feelings for him are the most obvious. I'll also be getting all the offshoot bad ends out of the way by starting with him. I don't dislike Keisuke, so it feels kind of bad to single him out like this. On the other hand, he is pretty useless. The broad strokes of the game's plot post-branch are pretty similar, so unfortunately this section will involve a lot of summary. Keisuke's route appears like a natural continuation of the common route, given that he was the impetus for most of its duration, to the point I forgot some scenes were exclusive to his route replaying this game. We continue from Keisuke's perspective after he runs away from the hotel, where he reflects on his and Akira's shared past. He always admired Akira, was drawn to Akira, and has always been in love with Akira. I'm not sure the last part counts as a reveal. He thought himself inferior to Akira and unworthy of his attention, but couldn't stand to be apart from him regardless. Now Keisuke is certain that Akira despises him for being weak and useless, and while consumed with self-loathing, he sees an ampoule of Rhine incidentally stashed away. Perhaps if he took it, he could be stronger, smarter, finally worthy of Akira's regard, his respect, his attention. Perhaps he could finally make Akira see him. He opens the ampoule and takes the drug. Later that day, Akira decides to gather information as to Keisuke's whereabouts at a bar where he and Keisuke first met MOTOMI, but finds it drenched in blood. The bar was an established neutral zone in Igra, yet all of its staff and patrons have been slaughtered, brutalized, chunks of their flesh strewn about the place. It's here where Akira fights Takeru and is soundly trounced, until he inadvertently swallows Akira's blood and collapses. Akira makes his escape, and Takeru feebly crawls after him until he's cornered by Keisuke, who promptly leaves his skull in. The next day, Akira runs into Keisuke, only to find him completely changed. Keisuke, who despised the idea of killing, even in self-defense, proudly declares himself responsible for the slaughter in the bar. He feels so free now. Finally, Akira can see him. More than being his equal, he's now his superior thanks to his newfound strength, which he'll use to get what he wants from him. And what he wants is to shatter Akira's detached demeanor by making him suffer, cry, and at the peak of his despair, kill him. Keisuke leaves after issuing this threat. The above events happen in every route, which leads Akira to seek out the other love interests for help in figuring out how to approach Keisuke. In Keisuke's route, Akira confides in no one and isolates himself in this dilemma. He doubts himself, blames himself for how Keisuke's changed. He never paid any regard to how other people felt about him, yet is now willing to put aside his mission to fix the damage he's caused. He reflects how he failed to express himself to Keisuke. He never despised him. He never wanted him gone. He simply couldn't stand how Keisuke thought himself beneath him. Yet despite his intentions, Keisuke is destroying himself to fix his supposed inferiority, and now he's become a monster because of it. In all routes, Keisuke abducts Akira off the street to terrorize him, but in Keisuke's route he also rapes him, with a pair of screwdrivers. If you pick the wrong choice during this sequence, Akira dies from anal bleeding due to said screwdrivers being shoved up his ass. What a handyman. Devastated, yet still determined to save Keisuke, Akira follows up on a previous invitation from Arbitro, who alluded to having information to share. If you pick the wrong choice during this sequence, Akira gets turned into Arbitro's mindless ex-slave after falling into the trap of eating the Olive Garden breadsticks. Cool. If you avoid this, Akira learns that his blood has special properties. Specifically, it counteracts the effects of Rhine, sending any Rhine users into immediate withdrawal. Another character routes, Akira learns this information from other sources. Wanting nothing more to do with Arbitro, Akira makes his exit to keep looking for Keisuke. Fortunately, he finds him immediately. Keisuke, having succeeded in his goal of making Akira suffer in despair, is finally ready to kill him. Before he can do so, Akira begins to speak. If nothing else, he wants to clear up the misunderstandings that led them to this point, and to make it clear how he's changed. If you make the wrong choice during this sequence, Keisuke will disembowel Akira and wave around his large intestine like a fucking jump rope. Awesome. But since this monologue occurs in every route, I thought I'd show the sequence here.
今まで俺は全てがどうでもいいと思って生きてきた。ずっと不思議だったんだ。生きることに執着する奴らが。なら死ぬってどういうことなのか。ブラスターも殺人は不可だ。俺がイグラに参加することを決めた理由もそこにあった。だけど俺が何も感じなかったのはブラスターが殺人不可だったからじゃない。もっと根本的な部分だ。ホテルでお前と言い争ってお前が出て行った時に思ったんだ。なんだよ。言いたかったのはこんなことじゃないって。お前に何かを求めてたわけじゃない。ただケイスケはケイスケとしてそのままでいればいいって、そういうことに気づいて分かった。どうして人が生きることに執着するのか。何か譲れないもののために生きたいと思うんだ。守りたいもの、欲しいもの、何でもいい。それがやっと分かった。お前が俺のことをどう思ってても仕方がないと思う。ケイスケ、俺はお前と一緒にここから出たい。だから死ぬわけにはいかない。俺もお前もだ。
やめろ！今さら何寝ぼけたこと言ってんだよ。もう遅いんだよ。
The two blades clash, and Akira barely manages to hold his own until Keisuke swallows his blood, aided by the rain. The withdrawal kicks in, and this is where the routes truly begin to diverge. In Keisuke's route, he collapses in place, and Akira uses all of his strength to get them indoors. Keisuke's withdrawal is agonizing. He screams for Akira to kill him if he won't grant him relief. Akira maintains his vigil, but can barely hold himself together through the strain of the past few days. Fortunately, dawn breaks and Keisuke returns to normal. Keisuke wasn't fully conscious of his actions, but he still remembers what he did. His mind unclouded, he breaks down over the weight of his sins. He's killed so many people and irreparably harmed his best friend. He also apologizes for the sexual assault. Nice job, Keisuke. Some visual novel love interests can't even manage that. Akira dejectedly tells him there's nothing he can do to undo the damage he's done. Nonetheless, he's duty-bound to live with the pain for the rest of his life. And while he can't and won't forget the fact that Keisuke raped him, Akira tells him that he should keep living if he wants to make up for his crimes. Their rift repaired, the two resume their friendship, which progresses into a relationship after Keisuke confesses his feelings. Characteristically, Akira doesn't fully understand the concept of a romantic relationship, but finds himself accepting Keisuke's idea of one. After all, they've been together for so long that it just feels natural. Anyway, what were we doing? Oh, right, the tournament. The moment the two step outside, there's dead bodies everywhere, and the nominal order of Igra seems to have broken down completely. The two confirm the situation with Arbitro. Undiluted Rhine began flooding the streets, turning the participants into mindless killing machines or fodder for said machines. This functionally means Igra is over, as the only participants who aren't dead already will be dead soon from drug use. There's no one left to take over, much less to operate the administrative proceedings necessary to run Viskio. Further, with Viskio's collapse, the two halves of Japan will soon begin a civil war to seize the territory. Realizing shit's hit the fan, Arbitro and the executioners make their escape, and Akira and Keisuke decide to do the same. On their way out, they may eat the mysterious brown-haired man we, the player, saw giving Ryan to Takeru. He drops some prose which effectively amounts to, "You didn't pick my route, I am now doomed to suffer, go be happy with your love interest, I guess." Akira can't shake the feeling he knows him from somewhere, but has little time to ponder because Gwen and Emma finally make another appearance to explain what it was all for and why they've done absolutely nothing to support this supposedly high-stakes mission. Well, Emma does all the explaining. They set up Akira with a false charge to get him to join IGRA, the actual reason for which was to lure the brown-haired man, NANO, out of hiding. NANO's blood is Rhine itself, which he spread throughout Toshima through Viskio. Knowing that Akira's blood is the perfect counter to NANO's, they assumed NANO would establish contact with him, which has now happened as intended. NANO and Akira's abilities were the product of human experimentation to produce the perfect soldier, an effort called Project Nicole, though NANO's time as a lab rat lasted for much longer. Also, Keisuke was part of this too, but both he and Akira were let go and their memories erased as they displayed less potential. Akira is horrified to learn of this forgotten past and outraged at the government treating him and Nano like things. The government now seeks to recapture Nano and Akira for their experiments in light of the coming war, but Emma won't let this happen. She would rather put Nano out of his misery now than let him be experimented on again. She shoots Gwen when he tries to stop her, and shoots Nano as well, but Nano shrugs it off and kills her. Well, that was abrupt. Maybe we'll get to see more of Emma in another route. Nano tells Akira and Keisuke to leave. They still have a chance of happiness, but he can never change. His blood has marked him for solitude. As the two leave Toshima, Keisuke reflects that his circumstances aren't so different from Nano. Their bodies were experimented on and made biologically separate from the rest of humanity. However, Akira's presence saved him from the loneliness that made Nano want to destroy everything. The two escape Toshima, live through the ensuing war, and make their living as co-workers in a metal shop. End of route. My initial reaction to finishing this route was a bewildered, wait, that's it? The final confrontation felt like it came out of nowhere, and had nothing to do with Keisuke and Akira. To be fair to Keisuke, this problem is felt across pretty much every route. Akira suddenly feels deeply aggrieved on behalf of a stranger from their shared past as science experiments, a past that he doesn't remember and was only just explained to him. Given this, his anger at the scientist's treatment of him feels a little overstated. Him and Nano were both unquestioningly subject to government abuse, but the results of that abuse feel disproportionate, making the connection tenuous. Nano's powers biologically imbued super strength. Meanwhile, Akira's powers biologically imbued Narcan. It's understandable why this would unsettle him, but it doesn't really exist on the same tier as Nano. His power is not as easily exploitable, since he's only a danger to Rhine users and only in direct proximity. It seems like he would only be captured as a backup if Nano failed, or to refine Nano's blood for mass distribution. The outcome of the research on his life was also minor relative to Nano. The ways in which he's disaffected and antisocial are in line with the setting, and he only discovered his so-called cursed blood in IGRA. The climax tries to set up Nano and Akira as narrative foils. In MOTOMI's route, Emma calls them both harbingers of destruction, but this doesn't really work when Akira can so easily walk away from it all. His power and curse are only relevant in a small fraction of the world. In addition to these baseline problems, Nano's handling is especially bizarre in Keisuke's route. Spending the climax focused on a character that isn't the love interest was always going to be kind of awkward, but in this case it's also a character that both of the route's leads are literally meeting for the first time. The only way Keisuke is related to the events going on is that he was also a science experiment, which he doesn't remember, was not visibly affected by in his adolescence or adulthood, and was also generally unremarkable as a subject. The only difference between him and the average person is a slightly higher affinity for Rhine, which explains why he became slightly more evil than the average person when taking it. It's also an effect he only experienced because he deliberately put himself in a war zone. This makes it hard to understand the connection he feels between himself and Nano. Nano's abilities were known and he was subject to constant surveillance, experimentation, and manipulation because of it. Meanwhile, Keisuke was able to lead a normal life to the standards of the world he lived in, which was only disrupted by his own choices. It's hard to see how Keisuke was saved from being alone in the world like Nano because of Akira, other than the fact that his crush likes him back now. How nice for him. While Keisuke's relationship to the broader plot is especially tenuous, the love story of Keisuke's route doesn't really make up for this. Namely, Keisuke just isn't particularly appealing as a love interest. Ragging on Keisuke like this feels at least a little mean, because at the end of the day, he's just a regular guy. But by the same token, because he's just a regular guy, there isn't a lot that's unique or interesting about him. Arguably, he's more of a player insert than Akira. He isn't particularly physically capable, and his aversion to violence generally reflects the average person's morals. I can see the beginnings of something interesting in how Keisuke's route builds on this. He's outclassed by Akira on so many levels that one would think Akira just kept him around to make himself look good, which is exactly what evil Keisuke accuses him of. I think the execution has two major problems. One, Keisuke's Rhine self is so ridiculously evil that he's an entirely different person. Two, Keisuke's pre-Rhine self does little to endear himself to the player. The first is a problem because it takes time away from Keisuke's route actually characterizing Keisuke. There's no point in sifting through the madness to see how his current state is the outgrowth of all his buried resentments, because he's just evil now. Akira carries all the burden of reflection, of how he failed to value or communicate with Keisuke, but it doesn't work when this is what's on the other side of the exchange. It's a shame because there was plenty of room for Keisuke to be engagingly toxic. It's easy to see how his idolization of and assumed unrequited gay feelings for Akira might turn to resentment. He might, in some part of himself, feel debased by these feelings and blame Akira for causing them. His Rhine self could have been equally driven by resentment and self-disgust. And arguably, Akira is culpable in the latter aspect given how he mostly treats Keisuke like a nuisance. Keisuke's demeanor post-Rhine also fails to ground his transformation. He doesn't really change or grow from the experience. He goes from being a regular guy with regular guy morals to a stronger regular guy with regular guy morals, who has to grapple with having committed several murders and an active violent rape. I guess he learned to value himself and communicate his feelings more, but that feels a bit dissonant given all the crimes. All this does is free him from the burden of being useless, which we're meant to believe wasn't the problem with him in the first place. Unfortunately, I'm not that nice. I think it is a problem. Keisuke's drastic transformation places the burden of his appeal on his pre-transformed state, which is completely and needlessly useless. To clarify, I don't have problems with Keisuke not being a fighter or disapproving of violence. There's plenty of merit in having a regular person in a setting like this. Being a regular member of society means being better equipped to deal with people than a bunch of lifelong street punks. Negotiation and nonviolent conflict resolution would be foreign concepts to someone like Akira, but would be the first defusal option for Keisuke. And even in a city enveloped in battles to the death, we meet several people who aren't fighters, or would be more receptive to soft skills rather than battle. Further, Keisuke is the only person of the cast that's immediately and fully trustworthy, given his complete lack of guile, which would free Akira of a lot of mental burden. Unfortunately, Keisuke doesn't do any of this. He doesn't endear himself to Motomi and Rin any more than Akira does. Akira takes the lead in discussions. Keisuke doesn't gather any information of note, and immediately requires rescue the second the two are on their own. The only helpful thing he does is give Akira his tags, which is completely pointless, because we never get that winning hand. He starts a liability and becomes a bigger liability when he leaves the safe zone after getting yelled at once. We're just supposed to accept that he's kind of incompetent sometimes, which I can't accept because of where we are and who else we're with. Keisuke can't survive independently nor stand alongside the rest of the cast. He might as well not exist at all, and I think the game agrees with me. Although Motomi's route is a lot better than Keisuke's, I still wouldn't say it's anything beyond passable. Still, a lot of small changes aid the balance between Togainu no Chi's main plot threads. Before Motomi's central conflict presents itself, he serves as a mentor figure to Akira to advise him on the Keisuke dilemma. Akira runs into Motomi in an abandoned church, and finds himself confiding in Motomi after some prodding. This pattern repeats several more times inside this church, and Akira finds himself growing to trust and value Motomi. In turn, Motomi gives fairly thoughtful advice and does a good job of meeting Akira where he's at. He's not used to seeking guidance, nor does he grasp its purpose, so Motomi encourages Akira to think of emotions in concrete terms. If they continue to build up inside a person, then they'll explode, connecting Akira's physical health to his mental well-being. He also draws upon his own experience of growing up Catholic to support this idea. Although he's no longer religious, he impresses upon Akira that there's power in faith and healing and confession, and by extension, so too in trusting in people and communicating with them. However, despite his own encouragement to get Akira to open up, he gives few details about himself. All we learn through these scenes is his religious background and that he had a son that would be around Akira's age. Nothing about his more recent past or how he wound up as an informant in a battle royale. Perhaps as a product of his occupation, Motomi is good at getting other people to divulge information about themselves without laying his own cards on the table. All this helps characterize Motomi even while the objective is on KEISUKE, which is good because he mainly came off as a slightly perverted middle-aged man in the common route. Motomi's route also ties in the Igra and NANO elements a lot more elegantly. Early on, Motomi takes Akira to a spectator match held when Il-Rei gets a challenge. Akira runs into NANO while he's there, and when he brings up his encounter with Motomi, he has a pretty intense reaction. Through this event, we see more of how Igra functions day to day and learn NANO has importance to the route's love interest, which gives Igra's later collapse and the final confrontation with NANO more weight. Togainu no Chi follows up on the trust and reliance Akira built up with Motomi as it moves its focus from KEISUKE to Motomi. Unlike in KEISUKE's route, KEISUKE staggers away after their fight and Akira doesn't have the strength to go after him. Motomi finds him in the state and gets him to stand down and get treatment. Back at the church, Motomi offers as before to be a listening ear. As Akira talks, Motomi perks up on one particular detail, that this is the third time someone has had a spontaneous seizure after consuming his blood. Nonetheless, he puts aside his curiosity to support Akira after losing one of his only friends. However, the trust Akira shows Motomi is tested when Emma suddenly decides to actually use the communicator she gave Akira to contact him. After she gets a status report, she comments on the mention of Motomi's name. She tells Akira his primary skill lies in getting people to trust him, and in doing so, he may prove to be a threat. Akira is shaken. He's never relied on someone like this before, and it never occurred to him that he might have been manipulated. A deep sense of uncertainty consumes him. He finds himself wanting to trust Motomi, but can't find anything in their interactions that would clear him of suspicion, because he doesn't know anything about the man. He confronts this doubt by demanding Motomi tell him his real purpose for being in Toshima, and is rebuffed when Motomi assumes his business persona in response. It seems Motomi won't reciprocate the trust Akira has shown him. As far as conflicts go, Motomi's is decent, if a bit little short-lived. It pairs well with his background as an information broker. All exchanges are theoretically a business opportunity for him, and a broker can't give out more than he receives if he wants to make a profit. Perhaps his affability and encouragement were nothing but a facade to hide the transactions taking place. I mean, probably not, but it makes sense Akira might think so. To his credit, Akira doesn't necessarily buy into Emma's words either. His departure is because he doesn't know if he can trust Motomi, not because anything he's done has been untrustworthy. Their exchange in the church is believable enough as a conflict without tarnishing either character. The game utilizes their splits to get them both caught up on the necessary plot details before the game ends. Akira confirms his blood does indeed have strange properties through another fight with a Rhine user, and has another encounter with NANO. Meanwhile, Motomi learns the present tournament and drug network is connected to a certain Project Nicole in a shakedown with Arbitro that I'm honestly shocked he survives for the amount of disrespect he shows to a man whose lackeys are pointing guns at him. But I'm glad we don't negotiate with pedophiles. The two have an awkward reunion after Akira's encounter with NANO, which Akira flees, only to reunite with Motomi again in the church. Fortunately, it looks like Motomi's ready to spill the beans. Let's go. Unfortunately, this is where my issues with Motomi's route starts. It's not that Motomi's backstory or motivations are poorly written in themselves. It's more to do with how the game's scope requires his burdens to be established and resolved in the space of a single encounter, and how Akira's character needs to shift to accommodate this. As to his backstory, Motomi participated in the research, Project Nicole, that experimented on children to create the ultimate weapon. He wasn't privy to the nature of the research and thought it was for medical applications, which is why he was willing to put his own son under his supervision in one of the test groups. Unfortunately, his son was killed during NANO's escape from the facility, and Motomi's wife killed herself in grief. This incident that took his family away additionally revealed to Motomi that he had unknowingly participated in the exploitation of children. In his guilt and self-disgust, Motomi vowed to hunt down and kill Nano, not out of vengeance, but to ensure the project could never start again. He went to Toshima because he caught word of Rhine and thought it seemed connected to Project Nicole. He mutters that he'll need to kill Akira too, as his blood similarly puts him at risk for the inhuman experiments. Akira abruptly challenges Motomi to go through with this threat. If he can't, then it means he should afford Nano the same advocacy, as the two were both victims of the research. He can't arbitrarily decide to kill one and spare the other. Predictably, Motomi can't go through with it, and he agrees to Akira's framing of Nano as a victim. As such, rather than kill Nano, they'll all run away from Toshima to avoid government capture. From there, the route ends much as KEISUKE's did after they consummate the relationship, but with the additional element of Nano staying behind to buy Akira and Motomi time instead of just giving up. Emma dies in much the same way as before, with some minimal interactions with Motomi beforehand. Well, that was still abrupt. Maybe we'll get more out of her in the next route. In Catholic tradition, Motomi acts like you're married now because you had sex once, and in the post-war aftermath, he makes his living as a photojournalist, with Akira as his assistant. End of route. It's a bit hard to communicate the issues with this ending when there's nothing that stands out as a problem with the content itself, but the delivery still lacks weight. To the route's credit, we are clued into Nano and Motomi's connection, and Akira has 2 interactions with Nano to go off of, so it makes slightly more sense why you would care so much about the guy. I've settled on trying to get the problems across by contrasting Motomi with a cooler Motomi, aka Taku from Slow Damage, to show how similar plot points can be delivered in a more engaging fashion. The two characters are similar enough that it honestly comes across as an intentional redo. Both are, or were, medical professionals, are old enough to credibly assume a paternal role for the main protagonist, and their central conflicts revolve around their struggle to balance professional ethical duty with their feelings towards the main protagonist. In Togainu no Chi, Akira asserts those feelings reveal a flaw in Motomi's supposed professional obligation. His conclusion lacked empathy and this was flawed. There wasn't any reason Nano needed to be killed, it was just the easier option for him because he didn't have a personal connection. In Slow Damage, the ethical dilemma is stronger and connects better to the love interest's arc. Taku was tasked with developing a highly addictive drug to secure the safety of his loved ones, in violation of the Hippocratic Oath. However, the fact that this is a dilemma in the first place condemns Taku's overprotective nature. He assumes this dilemma is his burden to bear, that his loved ones are helpless to protect themselves, much less to assist him, and that it falls to him and him alone to secure their safety. In Slow Damage, Toa asserts he can stand on equal footing with Taku and doesn't need his self-imposed martyrdom for protection. There wasn't any reason why it should be one choice or the other when Taku can rely on his loved ones to get him out of the situation, and in doing so beat the groomer allegations. Let's go! Toa and Taku resolve the conflict by using their individual skills and their broader support network to escape the hostage situation. By contrast, there's never a point where Akira and Motomi work together after they come to an understanding. Motomi's conflict over Nano doesn't circle back to his flaws as a character, his closing himself off from others, beyond his reluctance to disclose it in the first place. His conflict lacks the appropriate weight given it's resolved in a single interaction, and the way it's resolved feels non-specific to his dynamic with Akira. Everything functions correctly, but the cost of focusing purely on function means sacrificing the personal specificity afforded by details. I can understand why people like him so much, but Shiki's route is a massive bummer. It also has, I think, the strongest start of any of the routes. After fighting Takeru, Nano shows up to give Akira a mysterious bag and tells him to hand it off to whoever comes to pick it up. Akira finds himself unable to ask the man any questions before he leaves and decides to discard the bag. Unfortunately, he doesn't manage to make his escape before the intended recipient arrives, and oh no, it's Shiki. He takes the bag and seems infuriated at its contents. He then harasses Akira, interrogating him about why he was chosen as the messenger and ordering him to tell no one about this handoff. Akira gets fed up with this treatment, getting pushed around for reasons he can't even understand, and tells Shiki to fuck off. In response, Shiki holds Akira at knife blade point to extract submission, but Akira won't give it to him. Even if it costs him his life, he would rather die than give Shiki his customary satisfaction. This exchange repeats 2 more times. Shiki finds Akira, the two fight, Akira gets his shit kicked in, Shiki threatens his life, and Akira tells him to fuck off out of the shared values of personal dignity and fuck this guy. Akira is the nominal victor in these exchanges as he gets to keep his life without surrendering, but he grows increasingly frustrated with how Shiki physically overpowers him. Is it truly a victory if he only lives by the mercy of Shiki's capricious whims? What does Shiki even want from him? And why does he have to show up whenever Akira least wants to see him? This frustration builds and builds into their final real confrontation, where we get one of the best moments in the game.
どうした。このまま喉笛を潰してやろうか。そうしたらその屍を犯してやる。ふざけるな。
Shiki is the poster boy of this game, and these exchanges do a lot to make him deserving of that spotlight. Akira and the player have immediate reason to feel very strongly about this character on account of him being an insufferable asshole, leading to a desire to take him down, which only grows stronger as Akira fails to do so. Love is a foreign concept to someone like Akira, but frustration certainly isn't, so this animosity feels in line with his character. Akira and Shiki have a shonen-adjacent protag and rival relationship, and the fact that this is an 18+ BL game gives this game a prime opportunity to realize the homoeroticism inherent to this dynamic. Unfortunately, that isn't the direction this route goes in. Shiki happens upon Akira after his final fight with Keisuke and decides to kidnap him. Akira desperately fights to get away, to get back to Keisuke, but he doesn't have the strength to resist anymore. Having physically overpowered him, isolated him, Shiki then sets out to rob Akira of his dignity through several instances of sexual assault, meant to mark Shiki's ownership of him. Try as he might, Akira can't fight back against him. Try as he might, Akira can't keep his spirit from breaking. Eventually, Shiki leaves the apartment and leaves the door unlocked. Akira can't bring himself to escape. What difference would it make? Either stay and be treated like a dog, or leave and be killed like one. Despite his intent to not surrender his soul to Shiki, he's lost that battle as well. His rage gives way to fear, doubt, uncertainty. After all the sexual assault, Akira and Shiki have one real conversation after Shiki maybe catches feelings, which gives us more insight as to his motivations. Akira asks why Shiki is in Toshima in the first place. He's fighting in a tournament that promises untold wealth for its victor, but only the fighting itself seems to hold any interest for him. Shiki poses a question in turn. Has Akira ever seen true madness? A man devoid of emotion, who fights with peerless strength because of it? Wow, sure doesn't sound like anyone we know, wonder who it is. It seems there's someone capable of surpassing Shiki, and he doesn't seem to be the type to accept a loss. The plot can't really resolve itself while Akira confines himself in Shiki's apartment, so he eventually receives a summons. 2 of them, in fact. First, Emma calls to tell Akira there's no time left and they're heading to collect him. Upon hearing Shiki's name, Emma exasperatedly tells Akira he is the ill Ray he was supposed to be fighting. Surprise! Ill Ray is Shiki, the leader of Viskio, that drug organization we were supposed to topple, by assembling tags to challenge him. Remember? Akira still doesn't leave after the call, so Nano himself opens the door and demands Akira follow. Nano has a certain mysterious influence over Akira, so this time he obeys and follows Nano to a certain clearing. They don't have much time to talk before, oh hey, it's Emma, we just talked to you. Same exposition cycle, only this time Arbitro and the Executioners overhear the lore and realize Emma's holding their cash cow at gunpoint. A standoff ensues between Arbitro and Emma, but Arbitro is willing to settle for taking Akira captive. As the antivirus, he should be able to reverse engineer the product. Akira is caught between 2 tyrants, the government and Viskio, both willing to trample on his dignity in pursuit of power or profit. However, a 3rd tyrant shows up to break the deadlock. It's Shiki, and he kills Emma and Gwen with a mere slash of his sword. Not even a CG or even dying words this time. That's gotta be a new low. Well, maybe we'll get more out of her in the next route. Shiki immediately zeroes in on Nano, the man with peerless strength, the only one Shiki could never best. We get some last-minute backstory regarding their encounter. When they fought, for the first time in his life, Shiki felt defeat. More than that, he felt fear. Nano let Shiki live because he wanted to watch his pride destroy him. Knowing Shiki could never let his defeat stand, Nano handed Ryan off to Shiki, that's what was in the bag at the beginning, who in turn handed it off to Arbitro for distribution. Arbitro got his drug empire. Nano would achieve his goal of watching the world gorge and destroy itself from his cursed power. Meanwhile, Shiki would be able to continually train against Nano's power through Ryan, until one day he might surpass him by his own strength. This is Il-Ray's desire, and the very purpose of Igra, to power level Shiki until he could finally kill Nano. However, despite his efforts, he's still no match for him. Nano recognizes this and starts taking Shiki down a peg, another contender for best moment in the game.
なぜ執着するお前にとって強さを破壊安堵を得ようとしてバカの一つ覚えだな現に学んだらどう想像もできないだろうな
Predictably, Shiki crashes out, but then Nano offers an opportunity. If he wants strength, he needs to suffer, to gorge himself on the font of suffering that is Ryan, directly from the source, to take all that has made Nano what he is and make it his own. Shiki is the only character to have bad endings as epilogues, and this is where they both appear. In these endings, Shiki absorbs Nano's power and exerts his power omnidirectionally without a nemesis to topple. In short, he becomes a fascist and either uses Akira's power in conjunction with his to create a dictatorship with an army of genetically superior super soldiers, or uses his strength alone to build his kingdom. Akira either becomes his right-hand man or mistress, respectively. In the good ending, Akira stops Shiki from taking Nano's bargain. This is a compromise route for what Shiki wanted to achieve, defeating Nano by his strength alone, and unforgivable for a man that never yields. Shiki kills Nano, who refuses to put up a fight. He escapes Toshima with Akira, but loses a sense of purpose without his nemesis. His strength and struggle no longer seem to serve any purpose. He flatly tells Akira to go wherever he likes, and Akira can't find it in himself to be satisfied with his freedom. Perhaps as a fighter himself, he was drawn to Shiki's unyielding power in the same way Shiki was to Nano's. However, he never gets closure for his feelings. Shiki rapidly declines from a neurodegenerative disease to the point of being immobile and despondent. Nonetheless, Akira decides to stay by his side to live out the rest of their days, takes up Shiki's sword and his drip to battle against those who would seek him out. Unfortunately, sometimes doing the right thing means giving up on gay sex. You hate to see it. The good ending to Shiki's route is honestly pretty powerful for its lack of closure and melancholy. There's no meeting someone like Shiki in an equal relationship, nor can his crimes against Akira be forgiven, and sanding away his misdeeds for a happy ending would just take away his appeal as a love interest. The only way for them to be together in any semblance of a happy relationship is for Shiki to be robbed of the strength and guile he used to torment Akira. The only path forward for someone who strives for absolute power over others is to unleash their power onto others, reinforced by both of the bad endings. Either the world breaks or Shiki does. While I think Shiki's route ends the only way it should have, considering how he treats Akira, I have a lot of misgivings with its direction. I'm not going to disavow the use of rape in games in general, but I do have problems with how it's executed here. Similar to Motomi, I think Shiki has another double and slow damage where these elements, up to and including sexual assault, are handled way better, Madarame. In Shiki's route, the feelings of rage Akira has towards Shiki dissipate and fade into fear and uncertainty. Shiki well and truly conquers Akira, beating him into submission and surrender regardless of what Akira declares. Even though you can only get onto this route by refusing to yield, refusing to look away as your blades clash, this only made Shiki push all the harder. He praises Akira for bending but not breaking, but it's hard to take his word for it when we can see how Akira's mental state has deteriorated. It feels less like our hero being corrupted to the rival/villain's ideas than we just got the shit kicked out of us a bunch of times, so better to just keep our head down, I guess. The fire that drove Akira is beaten out of him, which as stated previously, is a massive bummer. In hilarious contrast, in slow damage, Toa gets the fire beaten into him. Madarame's route starts with him kidnapping Toa. Toa chooses despondency as his means of resistance, refusing to eat and drink, to which Madarame responds by force-feeding him, seeming deeply annoyed by the whole ordeal. Eventually, he orders Toa to leave as a means of showing dominance, demonstrating to him that he can't return to the way he was. He doesn't belong in his old world anymore. Toa goes back by his own volition and finally explodes at Madarame for his antics. Toa had to be abused into coming to this conclusion, but there's a lot more push and pull than a surface-level read might suggest. Madarame responds to some of Toa's real personal flaws, his utter passivity, lack of self-preservation, contentment with letting anyone and everyone trample over him, and Toa improves in these areas because of Madarame's interventions. Once he does so, Madarame takes him on in an equal partnership, involves Toa in his schemes, works with Toa's barterfront network, and everyone involved gets to bust up a Yakuza syndicate for fun. Once again, by contrast, Akira is under complete subjugation, isolation, and generally has a bad time for the entirety of the route. He went from being somewhat despondent and arrogant to being entirely disempowered, which is a letdown from how good their fights are. In summary, their dynamic feels like it should have built up to this. But instead we got this.
Oh, you drunk.
Nano's route is held back by the game's scope and structure, but compared to the prior routes, it has few unique sins of its own. Making Nano the focus helps make the climax more compelling since we are always going to circle back to him anyway, and the strange chemistry he has with Akira is interesting. For someone who speaks in riddles, he's esoteric enough for him to be intriguing, and communicative enough that he doesn't come across as annoying. His detachment from the world also provides Akira a reprieve from everything he's dealing with, leading to him seeking Nano out for comfort, similar to how he did with Motomi in his route. In their strange halfway conversations, Akira begins to pick up on Nano's despair. He seems to believe everything is lost to fate and he's powerless to change his own circumstances. Akira challenges him on this. Their circumstances alter because of their will, their actions. Nano saves Akira and Keisuke after their fight in the rain. Akira saves a stray cat. He challenges Nano's attitude on the basis of these results. They all would have died, but overcame this fate. Although it's never stated outright, Nano's route also makes use of another duality that's been in the background of this game, that of the flesh and the machine. Early on, Akira bemoans the fact that he has a body that requires rest and sustenance, instead of a mechanical one free from such constraints. Nano was experimented on to mold him into an emotionless weapon, essentially a realization of Akira's wish. Yet all routes, Nano's most of all, see Akira abandon his past uncaring attitude and these mechanical aspirations. He grows to value the so-called weaknesses of the flesh, its fragility, aspirations, and emotions, as he lives on in a relationship with the one he loves. From this framing, the story is about a child soldier groomed into mechanically living and dying, learning to be human again, a catalyst for which was the very blood in his veins. There's something to that. In Nano's route, more than letting himself be taught these things, Akira tries to bring out Nano's humanity. Most of their early scenes see Akira trying to bring a common-sense perspective to Nano's detached attitude, teaching him how to eat rations and encouraging him to act on his desires rather than passively letting fate decide. Unfortunately, Nano isn't here for any of these conversations. As Akira and Keisuke are recovering, Nano walks in with a certain someone's blood-stained katana and immediately proceeds to assault Akira. Honestly, of all the abrupt sexual assault scenes, this is probably the best one. From what we know about Nano's upbringing, it seems tragically realistic that the only way he'd know how to establish a connection and communicate his feelings would be forcing them on someone. Of course, Akira doesn't know any of this and immediately leaves their shelter with Keisuke afterwards. It seems understanding this mysterious man is beyond him. Of course, this game scope means we don't have time to give this kind of event the weight it deserves, So we're immediately in the final confrontation. First, Emma and Gwen show up as usual to secure the living weapon, but because Emma feels less self-conscious now that there's less people around, we get more backstory for her and Nano. Emma and Nano were sort of dating, and this connection was exploited by the research team to further their development efforts. Nano fell further into despair after learning of these manipulations. Nothing he had was real. Not his feelings, not his relationships, not the ideals that supposedly separated him from the ones he so effortlessly slaughtered. Seeking to bring an end to these illusions, he took Emma's arm instead of her heart during his escape, to bid farewell to their relationship and past self. From now on, he wouldn't use his powers to kill. Instead, he would watch people destroy themselves through his power, in order to watch the moment their lives shattered like crystal in their struggle against death. He made Igres a venue for his people watching. Seeing only despair in Nano, Emma concludes as before that only death can save him. As before, Nano kills her. When Akira asks why, Nano simply remarks, so that it would end, before turning to Akira with something new in his gaze, still covered with Emma's blood. He asks whether Akira would take his hand despite all the blood that stains it. Suddenly Akira remembers, and we finally learn what the deal is with all the flashback dream snippets we've seen throughout the game. Akira met Nano once for like 5 minutes at the orphanage, and Nano decided to give the child a knife as a parting gift. That's where Akira got his knife from. Before he can get too underwhelmed by the world's flimsiest basis for repressed dream memories, Motomi shows up ready to kill Nano because his goals were ultimately the same as Emma's. Since we didn't date him this time, he's far less sympathetic to Akira's argument, and he's ready to shoot. Wait, Motomi, you saw how that worked out for Emma, didn't you? Well, before someone who actually matters can die, Keisuke shows up having literally sniffed us out, and joins the Nano Akira defense force. However, these interruptions take enough time that Emma and Gwen's backup finally show up, where in other routes we outrun them. Motomi's just a guy with a gun, so he gets taken out pretty quickly, but Keisuke and Nano can more than hold their own thanks to their shared super strength abilities. Unfortunately, Keisuke is fatally injured after taking a bullet for Akira. Akira is devastated. He finally learned to value the connection between him and Keisuke, and now, at the very last moment, it's been ripped away from him. By contrast, Nano is confused. What point is there in grieving the inevitable? What point is there in hoping when despair is inevitable? Akira knows these questions aren't rhetorical. Hoping against hope that some part of Nano is still capable of understanding, he makes his final plea to reach Nano.
可能性を考えたことがないのか。もし被験者じゃなかったら、こんな研究のために連れ去られてなかったら、普通に笑ってたかもしれない。
笑う俺が不可能だ。
不可能じゃない。もしかしたらそうだったかもしれないという予測、希望、願い、それが可能性だ。絶望と諦めの先は破滅だけじゃない。定められてるかどうかなんて関係ない。少なくとも俺には圭介の気持ちを無駄にしたくない。だからそのためにもどんな運命だろうと歯向かってやる。
Against all odds, Akira finally gets through to him. He agrees to try and pursue his desires, freedom, alongside Akira. Motomi makes a brief appearance, but quickly stands down after seeing this change in Nano. He has cast away his nature as a weapon to embrace his humanity. The two are finally free to leave Toshima. Nano reminds Akira that they're fugitives now. The Japanese government will stop at nothing to recover their ultimate weapon, even beyond its borders. Akira resolves to meet this challenge, to defy their fate that their cursed blood has arranged for them. He then asks Nano for his name, and the credits begin to play as Nano tells him, a moment reserved for Akira alone. 5 years later, and the two are still on the run, but hopeful for their future. They'll always live freely, by each other's side. End of route. I've already identified what I feel are this route's shortcomings, so I don't feel the need to address them again here. Although I find some steps in getting to this ending somewhat questionable, this climax does a pretty good job relative to the other routes of tying in every major character for its true ending. We get a little more pathos for our quest givers, Motomi gets closure for his past, Shiki died living true to his ideals, Keisuke got to be muscle, and wait a second, where the hell is Rin? Akira is a fine character in each route, but I'd also argue he's been somewhat passive. A lot of events happen to him rather than being self-directed. He doesn't enter Igra by choice, his search for Keisuke is obviated by Keisuke just finding him 3 times. He survives a lot of encounters through his inherited Narcan powers rather than earning victory on his own merits, and the mystery of his blood and his mission are just resolved for him in Emma's exposition dump at the climax. This passivity also carries over to his relationships with the love interests. There are a fair number of non-consensual sexual encounters, but even the consensual ones are framed like there is something Akira is okay with letting happen to him, rather than something he's actively pursuing. Neither of these are necessarily issues in isolation. Akira is only beginning to understand relationships, much less love, so it makes sense that he'd be more reactive in response to the love interests. Further, the game is interested in examining how Akira is cursed by his blood, something outside his control, so this arguably pairs well with how Akira is constantly accosted by external forces. His agency is limited now, just like it was limited in his past when he was experimented on. However, while this passivity makes enough sense narratively, it also hinders reader investment the way it's handled here. Why should we be engaged with the relationship the protagonist is letting happen to him? Why should we be engaged with the protagonist's journey where every step is prepared for him? It wasn't until I played Rin's route that I realized what I was missing. To start, Rin's route pretty much jettisons everything that isn't relevant to his story. Changing content and structure to suit the love interest, what a novel idea. Rin shows up after Akira's first confrontation with evil Keisuke as per the prior routes. He's still flirtatious and overly familiar, which is off-putting to Akira given the circumstances. However, Rin later shows himself to be capable of more thoughtful interactions. He invites Akira to his favorite spot in the city, a rooftop with a view of the night sky and the Tokyo skyline. This is where he goes when he's overwhelmed to recenter himself. The view reminds him of how much things change based on perspective. Just like how all the skyscrapers look small from this vantage, your problems don't seem so bad if you take the time to step away and think. After all, your perspective only exposes a small facet of the greater whole. Rin gets Akira to open up about Keisuke through this explanation, and Akira takes the advice to heart. Rin continues to offer his aid to look for Keisuke, not wanting Akira to have a relationship end without closure. He seems melancholic about their present conflict. He's dealt with this kind of regret before. I'd argue Rin's the most interesting character even at the outset, and his route continues to build intrigue. Rin's the only character in the common route where we really get a glimpse of his character layers. In his introduction, he's overly familiar and extremely helpful, yet later we see his demeanor fall away and become deathly serious in response to a photograph, even though he keeps the friendly demeanor amid violence and gore. It's simple, but it casts some intrigue on the character. It also helps obfuscate some of the jankier parts of the game's common route. Rin does an absurd amount of legwork for 2 complete strangers. The glimpse we get of what may be his true personality makes us wonder what else he might be getting out of this, beyond just getting to hang out with a hot guy. We also have more time to wonder because Rin's also just more present throughout the route compared to the other love interests in theirs. Akira's walk before being kidnapped by Keisuke, Akira's thoughts after being kidnapped, and Akira finding Takeru's corpse are experienced by him alone in all other routes. Rin is with us for all 3 events and offers his commentary. He's unperturbed by violence, but reacts slightly more to the idea of a relationship abruptly ending. What he tells Akira on the roof further signposts the uncertainty surrounding him. At times, he's been playful and flirtatious, cold and emotionless, and now thoughtful and melancholic. We don't know how much of each aspect comprises his true personality. When he takes us north to get more info on Keisuke, a former teammate of his tells Akira Rin's supposed true character. He gets Rin to ditch us by telling Shiki's been spotted at a certain location, and Rin immediately gives chase. Then he declares Rin a traitor and a coward. He betrayed their former team in an incident that got almost all of them killed and cowardly avoids the survivors. Further, he had a one-sided crush on one of his dead teammates who Akira resembles, and is now using Akira as a substitute. Akira isn't sure how to take this information, but goes to find Rin, who is locked in a deadly struggle with Shiki. It's here where we're introduced to Rin's major conflict. He desperately throws himself at Shiki, who he's obviously outclassed by, and harshly rebukes Akira when he prevents him from running towards his death. He would rather die than let Shiki live. More than that, he might even prefer to die in the process. You, the player, can probably guess where this is going, though Akira remains confused since he doesn't know all mysteries will be resolved sometime in the next 2 hours of reading. Rin comes across Akira on the rooftop later, seeming apologetic, though still refuses to explain himself after Akira asks what his relationship to Shiki is. It's nice to have a character conflict that's not resolved immediately after being introduced. And this is even before the big branch point. There's actually some room for setup and payoff. Anyway, that major branch point. Keisuke slinks away after his big fight with Akira. Akira tries to go after him, but Rin shows up and stops him. And then it happens. Remember the rules of the tournament? Tags, winning poker hand. Well, Rin does. For the first and only time in this game, Rin looks at Akira's tags, compares it with his own, and realizes he could get a winning hand. And so...
ねえ、それちょうだい。ちょうだい。俺にそれ必要だから。
リン、
くれないなら。くれないなら殺すよ。
Finally, we get a love interest in the right mind trying to kill us for real. It feels like we're landing home. Predictably, he fails when Akira gouges his leg and beats the shit out of him. Nice. Akira's in sort of an awkward position. He lost his only friend, and the only person he had a connection with just tried to kill him. But he works with what he has. If Rin's all that's left, then he'll save him. He won't let anyone else die. And if Rin's going to run to his death, then he'll confine him to stop him from doing so. Rin fights Akira every step of the way, cursing him, demanding Akira get out of his way, declaring that he's just forcing his own wishes on him, but Akira maintains his vigil and treats his wounds. In one of his calmer moments, Akira gets some answers out of Rin. As you probably guessed, Il-rei, aka Shiki, was responsible for wiping out Rin's team. He is Rin's half-brother and used this connection to manipulate Rin into giving him the necessary information. Now Rin lives only to avenge his friends and redeem his role in their deaths. His friends are gone, his former teammates scorn him, and when he's alone he sees the faces of the dead. He sees no way out and thus has no reason to live. Akira still pushes back. He can't know what his dead teammates would have wished for. He chases death not for their sake, but because he wants to run away from his guilt. Rin screams at Akira to leave him be, but can't hide the sorrow in his voice. For all of Rin's hostility, it's hard to take it personally. It's obvious that Rin's anger and defiance stem from his self-hatred. Any harm he tries to inflict on Akira is secondary to what he does to himself. And if the player hates Rin, all they need to do is get off his route and let this reach its natural conclusion, Rin trying to die in a way he finds redemptive and succeeding. Rin's route isn't done with the Igratayans. Motomi drops by earlier to warn Akira about the upcoming civil war and says he'll get an escape route ready. However, before Akira can leave with Rin breaks out of confinement, steals Akira's tags, and issues a formal challenge to Il-rei. Akira desperately chases after him, getting to HQ just after the pre-match fanfare. Arbitro predicts Akira's arrival and offers him a proposal. Rin's in no condition to fight. He's struggling with a leg wound and an infection, so the fight's conclusion is blindingly obvious. In the interest of entertainment, Arbitro offers Akira the chance to fight Il-rei in his place. If you remember, this was Akira's reason for entering Igra. The mission seems moot with the oncoming civil war, so he takes this chance eagerly, purely for the motivation of saving Rin. Akira enters the arena, observes the blindingly obvious fact that Il-rei is Shiki. How did you not already come to this conclusion? Arbitro has Rin brought out to bask in the dramatics of an underdog rescued from certain death by the sacrifice of a friend. Of course, Rin isn't grateful. This is all he's lived for, and Akira is trying to take it away from him. He denounces any relation he has with Akira, calling him a nuisance, and Shiki rebukes Rin for his weakness, and Arbitro for his showmanship. Annoyed, Arbitro decides to up the stakes. The challenger to Il-rei is being contested by two individuals. Thus, the two will fight each other for the right to challenge Il-rei. Rin against Akira. Akira will let Rin die by Shiki's hands or his own. Is that all he fought for? Is that all this amounts to? Letting Rin kill himself or affirm Rin can't trust him? Absolutely not.
20秒
おい
10、9、8、7。6、5、4。3、2。
MOTOMI intervenes at the last second with explosives to affirm the hype moment, providing cover for the three to escape. MOTOMI leaves Rin and Akira alone to prepare supplies, which gives us the opportunity to talk Rin down. Predictably, Rin still isn't grateful. That was his battle and Akira stole it from him. Without Shiki, all he can do is take his anger out on Akira. But his rage doesn't carry any bite. It's all his desperate efforts to create the reality he believes he deserves. One where he isn't deserving of trust and can't put his trust in others, by actively sabotaging every relationship he can. He'll live and die as a betrayer and the betrayed. He who sabotaged his team and was rejected by the remnants. He won't be hurt anymore. Akira can see through this and calls Rin out on his fear, and declaring that he'll stand by him no matter what. In one last desperate push, Rin tries to earn Akira's disgust one more time by coming onto him. But Akira can see through this too. At first he tries to dissuade him, not out of revulsion but because he's concerned about Rin hurting himself, but then recognizes the test for what it is. Rin begging for rejection, and Akira refuses to give it to him, instead demonstrating his enthusiastic acceptance of Rin, mind, body, and soul, in one of the best story and each scene integration moments I've seen. Another thing I really like about the sequence is Akira demanding Rin take agency over his trust issues. Nothing, beyond his own word, can prove Akira to be unequivocally trustworthy. Ultimately, Rin has to be willing to extend that trust himself. Rin has offered support but still needs to take that first step. Akira's acceptance and support allows Rin to complete his character arc. But he's still going to fight Shiki. Not to die for himself, but to live for Akira. To gain closure so he can be with Akira wholly. Akira protests, but Rin reminds him trust goes both ways. He doesn't have any proof he can beat Shiki, and all available evidence is against him, but Akira needs to believe in him despite this. Akira relents and allows Rin to leave. The two brothers face off, katana to katana. Did you notice how Emma and Nano never showed up? That's because they don't matter to this route. They can be excluded. Akira has bigger problems than whatever's going on with his blood. We can spend all of the route focusing on the love interest. Naturally, the route ends by affirming Akira's trust. Rin has killed Shiki and bid farewell to his past, handing over Shiki's katana to cement this transformation. I think it's pretty awesome that Rin killing his brother is unequivocally a good thing in his route, which I think is in line with the kind of storytelling that this box art promises. Unfortunately, Rin is also the most extraneous to the through line of the main game, and little would change if you cut him out of the experience entirely. As it stands, he feels like a brief glimpse of what this game would be like if it got the time and expertise of some Nitro Trials later titles. Also, oh god, that means he didn't go through puberty.
I'm Chris Hansen.
So far, I've tried to distill the experience of Togainu no Chi by starting from its most superficial qualities and finishing with its most granular, from its world to its setting to its characters. Each layer is blemished in a variety of ways that infect the whole of the experience, but the deeper layers present far greater problems than the exterior ones. The work can't function if its base units are faulty, and for romance-focused visual novels like this, the most fundamental unit are the characters. You can't build a body of work if the innards are missing, or the whole experience deflates. Given all this, the section seems a little out of place. Honestly, I'm stretching the stabbing the body metaphor a lot by including this. How homosexuality is depicted has little to do with the basic storytelling operations of visual novels. But at the same time, it's also this work's greatest insult. Further, a lot of the technical issues are attributable to a lack of time and budget. This was the debut work from a debut studio. Of course, the broader world isn't well realized. Of course, the background characters are so insignificant. Of course, the routes are so similar and so short. This issue, and this issue alone, is where I feel comfortable planting my flag on the stance of, you really didn't have to do this. After all, if nothing else, at least the baseline experience should be improved by the story being about gay people, right? Right?
No!
This might not come as a surprise to people familiar with the world of BL, but this game with artfully rendered and voice-acted gay sex scenes doesn't actually feature a lot of gay people. Of the cast, Keisuke and Motomi actively denounce any homosexual identity. Keisuke claims he's attracted to Akira alone, and absolutely could not be attracted to any other man. Motomi claims he's not attracted to men as a category, but instead attracted to a person's spirit. Their stance of being only incidentally homosexual is reinforced by both of their past relationships. Keisuke with his ex-girlfriend and Motomi with his ex-wife. Shiki and Nano's ties to Akira similarly don't seem to be born from their sexual orientations, but by narrative opposition. Shiki confronts Akira as a rival, and his domination happens to extend to sexual affairs by nature of genre. He doesn't appear to be attracted to any gender as a category. He is only interested in using people in his quest for strength. Gender likely isn't a concern for him. In similar fashion, neither of Nano's relationships seem to imply any sexual preference. He was involved with Emma likely because she was the only person that treated him with any decency. He becomes involved with Akira because he is his biologically assigned narrative foil. Nano hasn't had the freedom to consider his preferences in general, so similar to Shiki, it makes sense that gender doesn't factor into his actions. However, I suppose him being only incidentally homosexual helps avoid a potential AIDS metaphor, so that's handy. Of the love interests, Rin is the only definitive homosexual, with his love for a past male comrade being a core part of his backstory, which he overcomes to foster another love with Akira. Though he never states any preferences outright, it's clear he's capable of being attracted to men categorically rather than through narrative demand. Speaking of Akira, his monologue indicates that he doesn't care about gender in terms of choosing partners. His more reactive nature in most of the routes means he generally mirrors his partner's attitudes towards homosexuality, and the only route where he is an active agent in a sexual encounter is towards the only declared homosexual, Rin. All of this discussion might seem trivial in light of this work's status of being an 18+ BL game. Surely gay is as gay does. All parties have engaged in gay sex, that's pretty gay, so that's where the discussion ends, right? And ordinarily I'd be fine with leaving it there. I don't need the story arc of every love interest to involve their sexual identity, for every love interest to declare a past same-sex relationship to confirm they're not player sexual, nor for every love interest's interaction with the main character to feel specific to their gender. Slow Damage's Taku and Madarame don't really deal with a love interest's sexual orientation, and I still like their routes. I'm also not saying that no queer person has experienced love this way. I'm sure there are people who would describe their relationships with their partners as them just happening to fall in love with someone of the same gender / outside the gender binary. And even if there were no IRL queer people for which this was true, I still don't think that's this game's cross to bear. BL often doesn't reflect real experiences of homosexual men, but I don't think it's fair to isolate the genre for that when no subgenre in the eroge space is especially realistic. Where the problems come in are with Arbitro, the gay pedophile who rapes and mutilates children, which the game reminds you of at close to every opportunity. The only flamboyant member of the cast and the most openly pathetic. Look at every scene where he's clowned on. Most of the cast gets their shot. Often this is in conjunction with them reminding us of Arbitro being a gay pedophile. It's hard to be charitable to this when his flamboyant dress and speech mark him as a negative stereotype of a homosexual. He is specifically a gay pedophile, and now he contrasts with the rest of the cast. I'm sure this wasn't intentional given this director and studio went on to produce Slow Damage, but it's hard not to feel like he's just here to let the rest of the cast present themselves as respectable homosexuals, who just happen to fall in love with a man, in contrast to the degenerate homosexual who is attracted to men as a category. Ultimately, the work feels like it's marking gay identity as degenerate and contemptible so as to not tarnish their love interests to a potentially homophobic audience. Don't worry, they're not actually gay. They wouldn't debase themselves by falling in love with another man aside from the main character. That would be disgusting. I'm sure it's not intentional given the two works were produced 17 years apart, but I like to imagine Arimura being the third person you meet in Slow Damage is an apology for stuff like this, given how fast you learn that he's 1, a normie, 2, homosexual, and 3, not into you. The LGBT community has forgiven Fuchi Kabura. Also, it's really funny that Taku's clinic is exclusively staffed with the girls and the gays. Per this running metaphor, our screwdrivers have hit bone marrow, and we have but to pull them out and examine the viscera before us. Each layer had its own faults, but the rot also strengthened with the depth of the examination. The innards are damaged and unsuitable for reuse. An utter failure if our goal was organ harvesting, but as rubberneckers, the spectacle is quite something. I started writing this as a way to interrogate my own feelings regarding this game, of how much I enjoyed my time with something I vehemently felt was a 3 out of 10 at best. That isn't an uncommon feeling. Plenty of people freely admit to enjoying things they don't find formally defensible, but rather than accepting those feelings and moving on, I'm more interested in how the work managed to appeal to me outside technical definitions of quality, having established that it fails on every metric. There's been movement in media analysis in exploring how bad media reaches us on levels other than comedic, as in the so bad it's good adage. Edgy media can minutely, if unintentionally, express the struggle of teenage girls. Glitches and bugs can give insight on the struggle of media making itself, giving pathos to the unseen makers. Things that are off provide fun curiosities and give the experience texture. Things that are missing can give space to contemplate. In light of this game, I'd like to propose another angle, that things that are gross and excessive have their own logic and appeal. Linda Williams opens her essay by stating her and her son's preference for movies that promise to elicit a physical reaction, which her son describes simply as gross. It seems like a childish dismissal or endorsement. We expect a 7-year-old to have an instinctive revulsion to romance movies, but delight in gross, violent spectacle or gross-out humor. But the word, or its many synonyms, is used by all kinds as a way to mark media experiences as excessive, sensational, and thus beyond respectability or analysis. Williams identifies 3 genres as trafficking and gross excess: pornography for its sex, horror for its violence, and melodrama for its emotion. These excesses are often derided as having no logic or reason other than eliciting a physical reaction in the viewer, which is in itself seen as disreputable. Think of how jump scares are seen as cheap, how tearjerker is often meant as an epithet, and how no one seems to be capable of discussing their experiences with pornography without some layer of self-protective irony. However, by simply dismissing such works as gratuitous, we ignore the system and structure by which these genres impart sensation. So what do these genres look like in practice? What are the connecting threads? First, they show bodies gripped in intense emotion to the point it overrides physical control, e.g., uncontrollable sobbing, arousal, or screaming in terror. Crucially, said bodies are almost always female. These genres' fixation on the female body as spectacle associate them with specific structures of perversions and gendered origin fantasies, which give the work its sensational appeal. Williams lays this out in this on-screen table. Take a second to look at it. Don't worry, we're going row by row here. For the perversions, used non-pejoratively, pornography is sadistic for its victimization of its characters, horror is sadomasochistic for a victimized character achieving active empowerment over the gender-confused monster, e.g. the final girl, and melodrama is masochistic for its identification with characters experiencing intense sorrow and suffering. These modes do not always occur at the expense of female characters. Women are not always dominated in pornography, there are male victims in horror, and there are tearjerkers predominantly featuring men. However, these genres are nonetheless tied to questions surrounding gender and gender difference through their focus on sex, sexualized violence, and emotion. Williams argues these genres' investment in gendered issues makes it possible to view them as genres of gender fantasy more generally. Williams identifies gender fantasy as originating from the desire to remedy the disjuncture between a past experience and its present symbolic representation. For psychoanalysis, these experiences and disjunctures arise from the discovery of sexual difference. This discovery creates 3 enigmas. The enigma of the origin of sexual desire, an enigma that is solved, so to speak, by the fantasy of seduction, the enigma of sexual difference, solved by the fantasy of castration, and finally, the enigma of the origin of the self, solved by the fantasy of family romance or return to origins. These fantasies map onto the body genres of pornography, horror, and melodrama, respectively. These fantasies are also evoked through different temporal regimes. On time, as the subjects of pornography perfectly synchronize in mutual pleasure, too early when the female victim meets the monster before she is prepared and is violently dismembered, castrated, and too late when the characters are unable to recapture happiness or their relationships in melodrama. The viewer rejoices in union, is shocked by the reveal, and sheds tears when the character's desires are finally unattainable. All of these elements reveal a system more complex than its cultural esteem indicates. As Williams concludes, to dismiss them, the body genres, as bad excess, whether of explicit sex, violence, or emotion, or as bad perversions, whether of masochism or sadism, is not to address their function as cultural problem solving. Genres thrive, after all, on the persistence of the problems they address, but genres thrive also in their ability to recast the nature of these problems. Togainu no Chi happens to map onto Williams' framework quite nicely given its status as a violent, emotionally charged eroge. Viewing Togainu no Chi as a body genre also helps us understand how it might succeed sensationally where it fails narratively. Going through Williams' table again, Akira is victimized by a lot of the story with the threat of sexual violence, but in all routes he triumphs over his primary adversary after repenting for his cruelty and indifference. This most closely aligns him with the sadomasochistic regime alongside the slasher final girls, as well as their methods of problem solving. Williams states in the slasher genre, violence related to sexual difference is the problem, more violence related to sexual difference is the solution. It is no coincidence that both of Akira's opponents in the common route, alongside the executioners, attempt to sexually assault him. Akira may not be sexually different from these men in the strict sense, but he is nonetheless feminized by them. Motomi himself spells out that Akira will be treated as a woman within Igra. To overcome the threat of violence, Akira leverages his otherness, his biological difference, and defeats his opponent by forcing him to ingest his bodily fluids. Further, his overcoming of Keisuke using his body is coincident with his revelation of the value of human life. Thus, his ability to use his body as a weapon is powered by his character arc of discarding his cold, clinical attitude to embrace his physical, emotionally driven existence. In slasher movies, the final girl is generally identified as defeating a gender-confused monster by reappropriating the symbols of phallic power through knives, chainsaws, etc. In Togainu no Chi, Akira defeats a roided-up Keisuke by utilizing his feminized body, each to its opposite, victim to agent, generating sadomasochistic appeal. Of course, if you want to see this twink obliterated, this game also has that covered in the hours to follow. The cross-genre appeal only expands when we move on to gender fantasy and their temporal regimes. Seduction is the most self-explanatory, and arrives on time when Akira is prepared to reciprocate the love interest's feelings, or is primed to receive the thematic content of the route. Castration is evoked when several characters wish to cement Akira's sexual difference by sexually assaulting him, denying his self-perceptions of himself as a man. These threats occur before Akira learns how his blood can overcome them, too early, and the executioner's bad ends go full slasher in playing out the violent consequences of these ill-timed encounters. On a first pass, violence could seemingly lurk behind every corner to ruin our unprepared protagonist. Melodrama related to origins only occurs at the end of each route. Akira had a found family in Keisuke, but learns to value it too late before it's stripped away from him. He had a valued connection in Nano, but leaves Toshima before he can remember what it was. Together, these genres tie into the overarching narrative of Akira abandoning an intellectual view of life for a humanized one. Initially, he views death as a purely clinical process. He can't understand why people fight to avoid it, why they try so hard to live. This ignorance leaves him unprepared for opponents with desires beyond the purely rational. He overcomes these threats by abandoning his original mindset. He learns to understand his opponent's desires and his own, and uses his body, not his reasoning or raw ability, to defeat Keisuke. His understanding paves the way for him to forge a physical connection with the love interest, or be forced to reckon with her worldview. However, his initial ignorance is punished once more with the loss of the closest thing he had to a family member, but his grief cements his transformation as a character into a human. He experiences the transcendent loss of Keisuke's death, now that he fully understands what it means. In the true ending, he uses his understanding of this loss to uncover Nano's humanity. The pair reconnect with a sensational human experience, desire, terror, loss, and through this, they succeed in turning from science experiments into people. Their bodies, through their blood, othered them from humanity, but through their bodies, they were able to recover what was stolen from them. Everything goes back to the body in this game, and thus this game is rife with sensation, communicated through the very stylistic excesses that impede its narrative functions. While all this serves to explain why this game might make you feel something, I feel unsatisfied with communicating the method and not the thing itself. The appeal of this work as a body genre is experienced primarily in the body, and thus isolated within an individual. We can share what our sensations were and analyze what aspect of the work inspired them, but the body is lost. We turn our sensations into words and physicality into ideas. The very medium of criticism seems to work against presenting the body as itself to an audience. So for me, the person writing this, who cares very much about making you, the viewer, feel some facsimile of what I felt playing this, what can I do? French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre's essay, What is Writing?, analyzes the unique transformation that occurs with prose relative to other mediums. He asserts that writers deal with meanings, artists of other mediums deal with signs. He begins by differentiating prose and poetry, as they have the most overlap. We might think of poets writing to communicate meaning as a writer would, but Sartre disagrees. If he meant it, he would have said it. The poet may have had some meaning in mind, but once that meaning is rendered in poetry, it transforms into something else, becomes a thing. By contrast, insofar as the writer of prose exhibits feelings, he illustrates them. Whereas, if the poet injects feelings into his poems, he ceases to recognize them. The words take hold of them, penetrate them, and metamorphose them. They do not signify them, even in his eyes. Emotion has become thing. It now has the opacity of things. It is compounded by the ambiguous properties of the words in which it was enclosed. How can one hope to provoke the indignation or the political enthusiasm of the reader, when the very thing one does is withdraw him from the human condition and thus invite him to consider with the eyes of God a language that has been turned inside out? Thus, writing is the only medium suitable for communicating meaning. Other mediums withdraw the viewer from the world of public discourse and communicate with a language immutable to our own. If that language were communicable, then we could convey legal code through paintings and perform interpretive dance in place of signatures. Non-prose mediums achieve something different relative to prose, which communicates in language rather than ambiguous signs. But in light of my current dilemma, I'd like to explore that something by examining what's left outside of prose. My logic is as follows. Prose communicates meaning, so non-prose communicates non-meaning. Body genres impart sensation. Sensation is not meaning. We think of the latter as a thought or idea, but the former is embodied. If the goal is to convey this embodied feeling, the only mediums left to try are non-prose ones. If non-prose mediums are equivalent in that they are unable to convey meaning, then they are equivalent in their ability to communicate non-meaning, of which sensation is a part. So if I want to impart the sensations experienced within this work, I am free to choose anything outside of prose. My options are limited. I'm not skilled enough in any of the plastic or somatic arts to try and impart bodily sensation through those means. I have only the means by which I have been expressing myself thus far. So if I can't talk my way through this, I have only one option. Sometimes a piece of art makes you feel an emotion so strong that you have to create more art to get it out of your system. Sometimes you value that emotion so strongly that you want to share it with the world. This is me sharing through the only means by which I might succeed.